The morning sun filtered through the tall courthouse windows, casting long shadows across the marble floors. Emma Mitchell held her mother's hand tightly as they walked through the imposing glass doors. At 9 years old, she had never imagined she would find herself in a place like this, a place that smelled of old wood, leather, and something she couldn't quite name. Perhaps it was fear itself that had a scent. Her mother, Jennifer, squeezed her hand reassuringly, though Emma could feel the tremor in her palm. They were both terrified, though for different reasons. 6 months. It had been exactly 6 months, 2 weeks and 3 days since that night, the night that had shattered their world and stripped away Emma's sense of safety forever. Emma remembered every single second of it, burned into her memory with the intensity of a branding iron. The details were so vivid, so crystalline clear in her mind, that sometimes she wondered if they were real or if her brain had invented them, embellished them, twisted them into something worse than what had actually happened. Her therapist, Dr. Collins, said that trauma did that sometimes. It fears, created phantom details, mixed reality with anxiety. But Emma knew better. She knew what she had seen that night. It started with the sound. That was what Emma always led with when she told the story, not the visual of the broken window or the shadow moving through their hallway, but the sound. The crash of glass shattering, the metallic tinkle as shards fell to the hardwood floor in the living room below. Emma had been sleeping, lost in a dream about running through a field of sunflowers. The sound jerked her awake like a physical blow. Her heart had immediately begun racing, hammering against her ribs so hard she thought it might burst through her chest. For a moment, she lay perfectly still under her quilt, telling herself it was nothing, that maybe a tree branch had fallen, or maybe her dad had dropped something in the garage. But she knew better. Deep in her bones, in some primitive part of her brain that ancestors had relied on to survive, Emma knew that something was terribly wrong. Then came her mother's scream. It wasn't a scream of surprise or even immediate terror. It was something worse, a primal, gut-wrenching wail that spoke of helplessness and fear and the violation of one's own home. That scream had propelled Emma out of bed faster than she'd ever moved. She remembered her bare feet hitting the cold hardwood floor, remembered the way her small body had moved on pure instinct toward her younger brother's room. She had to protect him. That's what big sisters did. That's what she had to do. The hallway had been pitch black. Their house, usually so familiar and comforting, had become a maze of shadows and danger. Emma's hand had pressed against the wall as she moved, her fingertips brushing against the wallpaper her mother had chosen, cream-colored with tiny blue flowers. She remembered how surreal it was to notice such a mundane detail while her heart was pounding so violently she could hear it in her ears. And then she had seen him. The figure had emerged from the darkness like something from a nightmare. Emma couldn't see his face clearly. The lighting was all wrong, the shadows too deep. But she could see his outline, his broad shoulders, the way he moved with purpose and confidence through their home as if he owned it. He was wearing dark clothes, she remembered that. Black or dark gray, maybe navy. There was a glint of something metallic in his right hand. A flashlight. No, something else. Something that caught the faint light coming from the street through the hallway window. A knife. Or maybe she was imagining that part. Dr. Collins had warned her about that. The mind sometimes filled in the blanks. What Emma had never imagined was that she would see his face well enough to identify him. But the man had turned toward her. Whether he hadn't seen her in the darkness, or whether her gasp of fear had alerted him, she wasn't sure. For a brief, terrible moment, their eyes had met. He was older than she'd expected, maybe in his 30s or 40s. His face was lean, his expression cold and hard. She remembered his eyes. They were the most striking feature, pale gray or blue, and they showed absolutely no emotion, no humanity. He looked at her like she was an object, a piece of furniture that had gotten in his way. Then he had moved past her toward her brother's room, and Emma had run back to her own room, locked the door, and hidden under her bed, her hand clamped over her mouth to muffle her crying. She had listened to the sounds of her home being violated, drawers being opened and slammed shut, the television being unplugged, the sound of her mother's jewelry box being knocked over. And underneath it all, her mother's voice, shaking but steady, saying, "Take what you want, just don't hurt the children, please don't hurt the children." The police had arrived within minutes, sirens wailing through the night. The burglar had fled out the back door, disappearing into the darkness before they could catch him. When her parents had finally found Emma under her bed, they had held her, and she had cried until she thought she had no tears left. Now, sitting in the courthouse waiting room 6 months later, Emma could still feel the phantom weight of her bed frame on her back, could still taste the fear in her mouth. Her therapist had helped her process a lot of it, had taught her breathing techniques and grounding exercises. But this, testifying in a real courtroom, potentially facing the man who had violated her home and her sense of safety, this was something else entirely. "You're going to be great," her mother whispered, kneeling down to Emma's level. Jennifer's eyes were red-rimmed from crying that morning. She had been crying a lot lately, ever since the trial date had been set. "Just tell the truth, sweetheart. That's all they're asking you to do. Tell the truth about what you saw and heard that night." Emma nodded, but her stomach was churning. She had told the story to the police officers, to the detectives, to her therapist, to her parents, and to the prosecutor. But telling it to a room full of strangers, possibly facing the actual man accused of the crime, was different. It felt monumental and impossible and terrifying all at once. A bailiff appeared in the doorway. "Emma Mitchell, the court is ready for you." Emma's legs felt like jelly as she stood up. Her mother's hand found hers again, and together they walked through the heavy wooden doors into the courtroom. This was it. This was the moment that would either bring closure to her family or trap them all in uncertainty and fear a while longer. She had no idea how much everything was about to change. The courtroom was larger than Emma had expected. The ceiling soared high above, adorned with ornate crown molding and old light fixtures that cast a warm, amber glow over everything. Long wooden benches lined the gallery where spectators sat, Emma's immediate family in the front row, but also reporters with notepads, court observers, and curious citizens who had come to witness the trial. Emma tried not to think about all those eyes on her as she was sworn in, placing her small hand on the Bible while the clerk asked her to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Her voice had been barely audible when she said, "I do." The prosecutor, a woman named Hayes in her early 50s with sharp features and an even sharper mind, had approached Emma with a warm smile. Had met with Emma and her parents 3 times before this day, preparing her, walking her through what to expect. She had been kind and patient, and Emma appreciated that. But now, standing in front of the jury box where 12 ordinary citizens sat watching her intently, Emma felt utterly alone. "Emma, I want you to take your time answering my questions," had begun, her voice gentle but authoritative. "There's no rush. If you need a moment to collect your thoughts, just let me know. Can you do that for me?" Emma had nodded, her hands gripping the sides of the witness chair so tightly her knuckles turned white. For the first hour had walked her through the events of that night. What time had she gone to bed? What was she wearing? Had she heard any unusual sounds that evening? Was she a light sleeper? The questions seemed innocent enough, but Emma understood their purpose, was establishing that Emma had been in a normal state of mind, had no reason to be confused or disoriented, and had been suddenly awakened by something genuinely alarming. Then came the harder questions. What exactly did you see? Can you describe the intruder's appearance, his height, his build, his clothing, his face? This was where things had become difficult. Emma had done her best to describe what she remembered, but even as she spoke, she could feel doubt creeping into her own mind. Had his face really been that angular, or was she imagining it? Had his eyes been pale blue or gray? What if she was misremembering? What if trauma had distorted her perception, exactly like Dr. Collins had warned her about? Had noticed Emma's hesitation. "Take your time," she'd reminded her gently. "What do you actually remember seeing?" Emma had closed her eyes, trying to transport herself back to that hallway, that moment of collision between her and the intruder. "His face," she'd said slowly. I saw his face for just a second. He turned toward me and I saw his eyes. They were cold, completely empty of any feeling, like he was looking at a piece of furniture, not a person. His face was thin and I think he had dark hair, maybe, I'm not entirely sure. The prosecutor had nodded, accepting this honest uncertainty. And when you looked at this man, had asked, gesturing toward the defendant's table, could you identify him as the man you saw that night? Emma had looked at the man sitting at the defense table. He was in his mid-30s with black hair and a relatively thin face. He could be the man, but he could also not be. After 6 months with trauma clouding her memories and doubt eroding her certainty, she honestly wasn't sure. I think so, Emma had said, hearing the uncertainty in her own voice. But I'm not completely sure. It was dark and I was scared, and I've tried to remember so many times that I'm not sure what's real anymore. She had seen the prosecutor's face tighten slightly at that response. It wasn't the clear, confident identification that had probably been hoping for. Then the defense attorney had stood up. His name was Richard Thornton, and he was good at his job, very good. He was older than maybe in his 60s, with silver hair and the kind of confidence that came from decades in the courtroom. He had approached Emma with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Miss Mitchell," he'd begun, his voice smooth as honey, "you've just that you're not entirely sure whether the man you saw that night was my client, correct?" I think it could have been him," Emma had replied, feeling her confidence crumbling under his gaze. "But you're not certain," Richard had pressed. "In fact, would it be fair to say that trauma and the passage of time have made your memory of that night quite unreliable?" Objection, had called out. "Counsel is testifying." Sustained, the judge had agreed. But the damage had been done. Richard had systematically dismantled Emma's testimony, highlighting every inconsistency, every moment of hesitation, every detail she couldn't quite remember. He had asked her leading questions about false memories, about how suggestible children could be, about how easily trauma could distort perception. By the time Emma had stepped down from the stand, she felt completely destroyed. She had let down her family. She hadn't done what she came here to do, identify the man who had invaded their home, who had violated their sanctuary, who had stolen their peace of mind. As she returned to the gallery to sit beside her mother, Jennifer had wrapped an arm around her and pulled her close, whispering, "You did great, baby. You told the truth." But Emma knew the truth. The truth was that Richard Thornton had planted seeds of doubt in the jury's minds, and those seeds were growing. Over the next 2 days of testimony, other witnesses had taken the stand. A neighbor claimed to have seen in the area that night. A detective presented fingerprint evidence. There were security camera recordings, though they were grainy and inconclusive. But the prosecution's case was weaker than it should have been, and everyone in the courtroom could feel it. The defense team had done an excellent job of poking holes in every piece of evidence. Fingerprints could have been planted or could have been from an innocent visit to the neighborhood. The witness had only seen the figure from a distance. The security footage could have captured anyone. By the time gave her closing arguments, the jury looked skeptical. Richard painted a picture of reasonable doubt so compelling that even Emma began to wonder if they had arrested the right person. The jury deliberated for 4 hours before returning to the courtroom looking conflicted and uncertain. Then the judge had announced that they had failed to reach a unanimous verdict. A mistrial had been declared, would either be or released, depending on the prosecution's decision. Emma had felt her heart sink. It was over and nothing had been resolved. The man who had broken into her home, or maybe not her home, maybe this was the wrong man, might walk free, and she had been unable to stop it. What no one in that courtroom knew was that everything was about to change. The real truth was still hidden, locked away in Emma's subconscious mind, waiting for the right trigger to set it free. The mistrial hung over the courtroom like a dark cloud. Emma sat in the gallery next to her mother, feeling the weight of her failure pressing down on her shoulders. Around them, people were gathering their things, preparing to leave. The judge had dismissed them for a 30-minute recess, while the attorneys and judge discussed what would happen next, whether there would be a retrial, whether would be released on bail, whether justice would be served, or whether a potentially guilty man would walk free. Emma's father, Michael, sat on Jennifer's other side, his jaw clenched tightly. He had taken time off work for this trial, sitting through every minute of testimony, every objection, every moment of legal maneuvering. Emma could see the frustration in his eyes, the same frustration she felt. They had done everything right. They had reported the crime, cooperated with the police, prepared for trial. Emma had forced herself to relive her trauma on the witness stand, and none of it had been enough. "It's not your fault," her mother whispered, squeezing Emma's hand. But they both knew that didn't change anything. Intent didn't matter when outcomes failed to deliver justice. The gallery had mostly emptied out. Reporters had rushed out to file their stories about the mistrial. Curious spectators who had come to watch the drama unfold had moved on to whatever they were doing next. Even some of the court staff seemed to be taking a break, stepping out into the hallway or disappearing into back offices. Then the doors at the back of the courtroom opened. Officer James entered, and everyone's attention immediately snapped to him. Not because of who he was, but because of who, or rather, what he had with him. The German Shepherd was enormous. The dog's coat was a rich black and tan, perfectly groomed, gleaming under the courtroom lights. His muscular body moved with the controlled grace of a highly trained animal. The dog's harness was official police issue, black with metal studs and official markings. This was Duke, one of the police department's elite K-9 units, trained in narcotics detection, bomb detection, and suspect apprehension. He was a working dog, a professional, treated with the same respect as any police officer. A few people who remained in the gallery looked up with interest. Officer was there for a scheduled demonstration, a routine training exercise that the courthouse had arranged as part of their community policing initiative. K-9 units were always impressive, always drew attention. Judge had approved the demonstration weeks ago, before the trial had even concluded. The timing was simply coincidental, a convergence of two completely unrelated events. Officer led Duke down the center aisle of the courtroom with practiced ease. The dog's claws clicked softly against the polished hardwood floor, a rhythmic, purposeful sound. Duke's head was up, alert, his dark eyes scanning the courtroom with intelligence and focus. Every muscle in his body seemed coiled with potential energy, ready for whatever task might be asked of him. Most people barely noticed. The judge was reviewing some documents. The court reporter was checking her machine. The prosecution and defense teams were huddled with the judge in her chambers, out of view. Hayes's assistant was typing something on her laptop. Richard Thornton's paralegal was organizing files. But Emma noticed. Her entire body went rigid the moment she saw the dog. Every muscle tensed. Every nerve ending fired at once. Her breath caught in her throat, and her hand gripped her mother's so tightly that Jennifer let out a small gasp of pain. "Emma," her mother whispered, "what's wrong?" Emma couldn't answer. She couldn't do anything but stare at the dog with an intensity that bordered on obsessive. Her mind was racing, her thoughts fragmented and confused. Something about the dog was triggering something deep inside her, something that had been buried beneath layers of trauma and time and doubt. Her subconscious mind was trying to tell her something, screaming at her, pounding against the walls of her conscious awareness like a prisoner desperate to escape. The dog's markings. That was what caught her attention first. The distinctive white patch on his left ear, the way his tail curved at the tip, the silver chain collar around his neck with the police badge attached. These details were flooding back to her with such intensity that she felt dizzy. A flash of memory, not from the night of the break-in, from before that, from days, weeks before the invasion of her home. She was walking with her father in the neighborhood park. A man was walking with a large German Shepherd. She remembered being fascinated by the dog, wanting to pet it. The man had stopped to let her. She remembered the dog's markings, remembered commenting on how unusual the white patch on its ear was. And then another memory layered on top of that one, from that terrible night. She had been in the hallway and she had thought she was alone with the burglar, just her and him and the darkness. But had there been something else? Had there been a shadow, a presence, an animal? Her mind had been so focused on the human threat that she hadn't consciously registered it. But her subconscious mind had. Her subconscious mind never forgot anything. It recorded everything. Every sight, every sound, every smell, with the precision of a video camera. The intruder had a dog with him. She knew it now with absolute certainty, even though she hadn't consciously remembered it until this very moment. He had a German shepherd, and that German shepherd had looked exactly like the dog now walking past her in the courtroom. Emma's hand shot up. She couldn't control it. Her body had taken over, responding to something her conscious mind was only now beginning to process. "That's him," she cried out, her voice cutting through the courtroom like a knife. "That's him." The courtroom froze. Every head turned toward her. Officer stopped in his tracks, confused, unsure if Emma was pointing at him or the dog or something else entirely. Her mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Her father stood up slightly, his face registering shock and confusion. Emma's arm remained extended, her finger pointing directly at Duke. Her entire body was shaking with the intensity of the revelation that was now flooding through her consciousness. "The man," Emma gasped, her words tumbling out in a rush. "The man who broke into our house, he had a dog, just like that dog, the same markings. I forgot, I blocked it out, but I remember now. He wasn't alone that night. He had a German shepherd with him." The courtroom erupted into chaos. The judge emerged from her chambers, her face a mask of confusion and irritation. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded. Hayes stood up so quickly her chair nearly tipped over backward. Richard Thornton's face went pale. Officer looked completely bewildered, unsure what had just happened or why a 9-year-old girl was pointing at his dog. Emma's mother pulled her close, and Emma buried her face in her mother's shoulder, tears streaming down her cheeks. But these weren't tears of sadness or fear. These were tears of relief, of clarity, of truth finally breaking through the darkness that had clouded her mind for 6 long months. She remembered. Finally, she remembered. Judge's gavel came down hard against the wooden block with a sharp crack that echoed through the courtroom. "Order! I will have order in this courtroom," she commanded, her voice cutting through the noise and confusion that had erupted the moment Emma's words left her mouth. But the damage, or perhaps the breakthrough, had already been done. Emma sat in her mother's embrace, her small body still trembling with the force of her own revelation. She hadn't meant to cry out like that, hadn't planned what she was going to say. The words had simply erupted from somewhere deep inside her, from the part of her mind that had been processing and storing information all along, waiting for the right trigger to release it. Hayes was already on her feet, her sharp legal mind immediately recognizing the significance of what had just happened. She approached the judge's bench, her face flushed with a mixture of excitement and barely contained urgency. Richard Thornton was also on his feet, his face registering alarm. He understood as well as did that something momentous had just occurred. "Your Honor," began, her voice steady but carrying an undercurrent of intensity, "I request an immediate recess. This witness has just recalled critical information that could be material to this case." Richard wasn't going to let that happen without a fight. "Objection, Your Honor. This appears to be coached testimony, deliberately engineered by the prosecution. The witness was emotionally manipulated by seeing a police dog." "Objection overruled," Judge interrupted, her eyes narrowed. She had been a judge for 23 years and had developed an acute instinct for when something genuine was happening in her courtroom. This was genuine. "We are adjourned for 1 hour. I want to speak with both counsel and the witness in my chambers. Now." Emma was escorted into Judge's private chambers, a wood-paneled room that smelled of leather and old books. Her mother was allowed to come with her, but her father remained in the courtroom. Emma sat in a leather chair that was far too big for her feet swinging above the floor as Judge Hayes, Richard Thornton, and a court reporter settled into seats around a mahogany table. "Miss Mitchell," Judge began, her voice gentler than it had been in the courtroom, "I need you to tell me exactly what you remember about this German Shepherd. Take your time. Don't rush. And most importantly, only tell me what you actually remember, not what you think you should remember. Do you understand?" Emma nodded, her mouth dry. She took a sip of water her mother offered her. "I saw a dog like that before," Emma began slowly, carefully choosing her words. "In the park with my dad. A man was walking the dog and I remember being interested in it because of the white patch on its ear. It was unusual. Most dogs don't have markings exactly like that." Leaned forward slightly. "And do you remember what this man looked like?" "A little," Emma said, "but not well. It was just a quick meeting in the park. He wasn't very friendly. He let me pet the dog, but he seemed like he didn't want to talk." Richard seized on this. "So your memory of the man is vague. You couldn't identify him positively, correct?" "I don't know," Emma admitted. "But when I was in the hallway that night, I didn't consciously think about the dog. But now that I've seen Duke, the police dog, everything is coming back. The burglar had a dog with him, I know that now. I can see it in my mind, clear as day. He was walking the dog. He said something about the dog to someone. Maybe to himself, or maybe he was talking to someone on the phone. He said, 'The dog needed a walk before we do this.'" The courtroom fell silent. Richard's face went very pale. Eyes widened. "Your Honor," said, her voice barely containing her excitement, "this is significant new evidence. This detail wasn't mentioned in the original police report, which means it's not something the witness was coached on. This is a genuine recovered memory triggered by seeing a similar dog." Richard stood up. "This is highly irregular, Your Honor. The witness is a traumatized child whose memory has already been proven unreliable. Now she's claiming to remember new details months later. This could be confabulation, false memory implantation." "Sit down, Mr. Thornton," Judge said firmly. She turned to Emma. "Honey, I need to ask you something very important. Did anyone ask you to remember this? Did anyone tell you what to remember?" "No," Emma said emphatically. She understood the importance of the question. "I didn't even know about the dog until I saw Duke today. It all came back at once." Judge nodded slowly. She turned to, "This investigation needs to move immediately. If what this child is saying is true, we need to identify the dog and therefore potentially identify the correct perpetrator. I'm recessing this trial indefinitely. But before we conclude for today, I want the record to show that the witness has provided new material information that may exonerate the defendant or may lead to the identification of a different suspect. This court will cooperate fully with law enforcement in following up on this lead." Officer, who had been standing awkwardly in the back of the chambers during all of this, stepped forward. "I can help with that, Your Honor. I can run the dog's description through the police database. German Shepherds with that particular marking pattern should be relatively rare. We can cross-reference ownership records, training records, anything that might help us identify the animal and therefore the owner." Was already pulling out her phone. "I'm calling Detective Sarah. She was the lead investigator on this case. We need her working on this immediately." What happened next occurred with the speed of an avalanche. Judge emerged from her chambers and made an official statement in the courtroom about the new evidence. She dismissed the jury, explaining that the case would be postponed indefinitely pending a police investigation into newly revealed information. Sat at the defense table, his face a mixture of emotions: confusion, hope, fear, uncertainty. He didn't know if Emma's revelation would help or hurt him. The revelation that the burglar had a dog didn't prove that was innocent. It only complicated things further. But for the police, it was like someone had turned on a light in a dark room. By 4 p.m. that afternoon, Detective Sarah was sitting at her desk, surrounded by printouts and database searches. Officer had narrowed the search to German Shepherds registered in the county area with distinctive ear markings matching the description Emma had provided. The list had been reduced to 43 possibilities. Sarah was methodical and thorough. She began running each dog owner against criminal databases, looking for any connection to or to the neighborhood where Emma's home had been burglarized. She was looking for a pattern, for a connection, for something that would break this case wide open. And she was about to find it. 3 hours into her search, Sarah's hands began to shake as information aligned on her computer screen. A German Shepherd named Shadow, registered to a man named Devon, had the exact markings Emma had described, and Devon's address was listed as being just 2 miles from Emma's home. But here's what made Sarah's heart race. Devon was his brother. The implications were staggering. Who had been accused of the burglary might not have been the burglar at all. His brother might have been the actual perpetrator, and might have known it. The question now was, why hadn't he said anything? Detective Sarah didn't believe in coincidences. In her 15 years with the police department, she had learned that connections, when they appeared, were usually meaningful. The connection between and Devon couldn't be ignored, and neither could the fact that Devon owned a German Shepherd with the exact markings Emma had described. She pulled up Devon's file on her computer screen. He was 32 years old with a record of minor offenses, petty theft, trespassing, a DUI from 5 years ago. Nothing that screamed major burglar, but nothing that ruled it out either. She clicked through his photos and began studying his face. Could he be the man Emma had seen that night? It was hard to say. The darkness, the trauma, the passage of time, all of it had conspired to make Emma's memory unreliable. But the dog was a concrete detail, something physical and verifiable. Sarah pulled up another file. His record was much cleaner. He had no priors, worked as a software developer, had a stable address and employment history. On paper, he didn't look like a burglar, but paper didn't always tell the whole story. She grabbed her phone and called Officer. "I need everything you can find on Devon," she said without preamble. "Criminal history, associates, financial records, anything that might suggest he was involved in burglaries in the area." "Already on it," replied. "I've got preliminary results. Devon has been linked to at least 3 other break-ins in the neighborhood over the past year. Same MO, residential homes during the daytime, quick hits, jewelry and electronics targeted. The cases are still open, but there was never enough evidence to press charges." Sarah's pulse quickened. This was it. This was the pattern she'd been looking for. Pull the security footage from those properties. And I need the registration papers for his dog. I want to confirm the markings match what the Mitchell girl described. 20 minutes later, Sarah was reviewing security footage from a home 2 blocks away from Emma's, burglarized 8 months earlier. The footage was grainy but unmistakable. A man walking a large German Shepherd down the street at 2:15 a.m. The dog had distinctive white markings on its left ear. It was a match. Sarah felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with breaking a case. She had been a cop long enough to know when she was on the right track. The question now was, what was his connection to all of this? Why had he allowed himself to be accused when his brother was the actual perpetrator? She decided it was time to have a conversation with directly. The precinct's interrogation room was small and windowless, lit by harsh fluorescent lights. Sat at a metal table, his hands folded in front of him. He had been brought in for questioning, not arrested, not yet anyway. His attorney, Richard Thornton, sat beside him, looking increasingly worried. Sarah began, placing the security footage images on the table in front of him. "I need you to look at these. Do you recognize anyone in these photos?" His face went white. He looked at the images, the man with the dog, the man who was clearly his brother, and then looked away. "I'm not saying anything without my attorney present," said, but his voice was hollow, defeated. Your brother Devin is the real burglar, Sarah said, her voice steady but not unkind. We have security footage. We have the dog's registration. We have the victim's testimony. We're building a case against him right now. But here's what I don't understand. You let yourself be accused. You sat through a trial and didn't say a word about your brother's involvement. Why? Why would you do that? Richard Thornton placed a hand on his arm. Don't answer that, he advised. But shook his head. He looked at Sarah with eyes that were haunted, desperate, full of conflicting emotions. I didn't have a choice, he said quietly. Sarah leaned back in her chair. Tell me. For the next hour, story unfolded like a dark tapestry. Devin had gotten involved with a loan shark named 2 years ago. The debt had spiraled out of control. Devin owed $50,000, had made it clear that if the debt wasn't paid, Devin's family would pay the price. When found out about the debt, he had tried to help, but the money wasn't coming fast enough. Then Devin had started planning the burglaries. Quick hits, he'd said, just enough to get the money together to pay off, but something had gone wrong. The police had started investigating. They'd arrested based on circumstantial evidence. Devin had approached him the night before, was supposed to turn himself in. He said if I took the fall, if I took the blame, he'd make sure nothing happened to our mother, explained, his voice breaking. He said had agreed to the arrangement. If I went to prison, he'd pay them what he could, and eventually the debt would be settled. He said it was the only way to keep our family safe. Sarah felt a surge of sympathy for the man sitting across from her, even as she processed the implications of what he was saying. Had sacrificed his own freedom to protect his family from a criminal organization. Why didn't you tell your attorney any of this? Sarah asked. Because I didn't know if was bluffing about hurting my mother, said. I still don't. If I go to the authorities, if I testify against my brother, what's to stop from coming after her anyway? At least if I'm in prison, I know my brother is still out there to protect her. Richard Thornton looked like he wanted to sink through the floor. His client had been sabotaging his own defense. Sarah understood now. This wasn't just a simple burglary case. It was a case involving organized crime, family loyalty, threats, and coercion. She needed to bring in more resources. Within the hour, she had contacted the FBI task force that handled organized crime in the region. She had also obtained warrants to search Devin's residence, and she had personally called Emma's family to let them know that significant progress had been made. By evening, the search of Devin's apartment had yielded multiple pieces of stolen merchandise from the burglaries. Jewelry, electronics, collectibles, all of it matched descriptions from the crime reports. In a locked box under his bed, investigators found photographs, addresses, dates, detailed records of every theft he had committed. But more importantly, they found documentation of payments too. Thousands of dollars in cash, carefully recorded in a ledger that Devin had kept for reasons Sarah couldn't quite comprehend. Perhaps he had thought it would protect him somehow. Perhaps he had been trying to keep track of how much he owed. Whatever the reason, it was damning evidence. By midnight, Devin had been arrested and charged with 5 counts of residential burglary, conspiracy, money laundering, and associating with a known criminal enterprise. The FBI was preparing to move against and his organization, and was no longer a suspect. The mistrial would be dismissed and he would be released. Sarah sat at her desk, reviewing the case file one more time. She thought about Emma Mitchell, sitting in a courtroom and remembering a dog. She thought about the power of trauma, the way memories could be suppressed and then suddenly resurface. She thought about how one child's clarity had unraveled a web of crime that went far deeper than anyone had realized. Justice, Sarah reflected, sometimes came from the most unexpected places, and sometimes it took the innocent observation of a frightened child to reveal the truth that had been hiding in plain sight all along. The interrogation room at the police precinct was cold and sterile. Devin sat across from Detective Sarah and FBI agent Michael Torres, his hands shackled to the metal table in front of him. A court-appointed attorney, a woman named no relation to the judge, sat beside him, her face a mask of professional detachment. Devon looked nothing like his brother. Where had an air of quiet intelligence and stability, Devon seemed coiled with nervous energy. His leg bounced constantly under the table. His fingers drummed against the metal surface despite the restraints. His eyes darted from Sarah to Tors and back again, calculating, searching for a way out. "Devon," Sarah began, her voice calm and measured, "we have security footage placing you at 5 different residential break-ins over the past 12 months. We have stolen property recovered from your apartment that matches descriptions from those crimes. We have your ledger documenting payments too. The evidence is overwhelming. I suggest you start cooperating now, while you still have the opportunity to make a deal." Devon said nothing. He looked at his attorney, who gave him a subtle nod. "My client exercises his right to counsel," said formally. "If you have charges, file them. Otherwise, this conversation is over." Sarah and Tors exchanged a look. They had expected this. What they didn't expect was what happened next. The holding cell door opened, and a corrections officer escorted in another man, tall, muscular, with cold gray eyes and a scar running down his left cheek. His name was, and he had just been arrested by the FBI at his residence on the other side of the city. Devon's face went absolutely pale. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice rising. "What is he doing here?" Was placed in an adjacent interrogation room, visible through the one-way glass. FBI agents immediately began questioning him about his criminal enterprise, his loan sharking operation, his connections to organized crime. Sarah watched Devon watch, and she saw the exact moment when Devon realized he had been set up, wasn't going to protect him, was looking out for himself, just as criminals always did. "Your boss just gave you up," Tors said quietly. "He's in the next room right now, telling us everything. About the loan, about the threats against your family, about how he pressured you into the burglaries. He's making a deal for himself, which means he's not protecting you. You're going to take the full weight of this, Devon, unless you cooperate." Devon's hands began to shake. Sweat beaded on his forehead. His attorney leaned over and whispered something to him, but Devon wasn't listening. He was staring through the glass, watching his fate slip away. "I want to talk to my brother," Devon said suddenly. "I want to talk to—" "That's not possible right now," Sarah said. "Then I want a deal," Devon blurted out. "I want immunity or a reduced sentence or something. I'll tell you everything. But I need protection. I need to know that won't come after my family." The attorney placed a hand on Devon's arm. "Don't say anything without negotiating terms first," she advised. But Devon was unraveling. Months of pressure, fear, and guilt had worn him down to the breaking point. He looked at Sarah with desperation in his eyes. "My brother didn't know," Devon said, his words tumbling out in a rush. "Didn't know about, I never told him. When the police arrested me, when they connected me to the break-ins, I panicked. I realized they might try to pin it on too. I went to him and I told him. I told him I was in debt, serious debt, to a dangerous man. I told him if I went to prison, would leave me alone. But if I didn't go to prison, if I kept getting arrested, would come after our family." Sarah and Tors listened, both of them knowing this was a critical moment. "I asked to take the fall," Devon continued, his voice breaking. "I said it was temporary, that I'd get the money to pay and then the charges would be dropped. That was a lie. I had no intention of that happening. I had no way to pay. I was stuck in this cycle, and the only way I could see out of it was if someone else took the consequences." "Your brother sacrificed his freedom for you," Tors said quietly. "I know," Devon shouted, then slammed his forehead against the table. "I know, don't you think I know that? He's innocent. He did nothing wrong, and he was going to go to prison because of me." Stood up. "Detectives, my client is willing to provide full cooperation in exchange for consideration, but we need to discuss terms with the prosecutor before he says anything else." Over the next 6 hours, Negotiations occurred in a series of back rooms and hallway conversations. The prosecutor, Hayes, worked with the FBI and the defense to hammer out an agreement. Devon would receive a reduced sentence in exchange for his testimony against and his organization. He would also provide detailed information about his criminal activities, potentially solving several other cases in the region. When the negotiations were complete, Devon was brought back into the interrogation room. He confessed to all 5 burglaries. He detailed his relationship with, how the loan had spiraled out of control, how he had been coerced into criminal activity. He explained how he had used his brother as a shield, how he had convinced to take the blame. "Why did agree?" Sarah asked. "If you were just going to serve time anyway, why would he sacrifice himself?" Devon's eyes filled with tears. "Because I told him would hurt our mother if I didn't comply. I said had given me an ultimatum. Either I go to prison and he leaves my family alone, or I stay free and my mother pays the price. I lied but believed me. He's my older brother. He's always protected me. I knew he would do anything to keep our mother safe." The interrogation continued into the early morning hours. By the time it ended, Devon had provided enough information to build a much larger case against his entire criminal network. Meanwhile, in a different part of the precinct, Detective Sarah sat down in a different interrogation room. "You're free to go," she told him. "All charges have been dropped. Your brother has confessed. The real burglar has been identified and arrested." His face crumpled. Relief, anger, sadness, and confusion all played across his features simultaneously. "What about my brother?" "He's made a deal. He's going to testify against and his organization. He'll serve reduced time." Closed his eyes. When he opened them again, tears were streaming down his face. "I did the right thing then, protecting him, even though it meant going to prison." Sarah considered the question carefully. "I don't know if there's a right answer in a situation like this," she said honestly. "You made a choice based on love and fear. That's human. But your brother made a different choice. He lied to you, he manipulated you, he used your love against you. That's something you'll both have to come to terms with." Was released later that morning. He walked out of the police precinct into the bright sunshine, a free man but carrying the weight of everything that had happened. His mother was waiting for him outside, and when she saw him, she ran to him and held him. Back at the precinct, Sarah filed her reports. The case that had started with a frightened 9-year-old girl pointing at a police dog had spiraled into something much larger, a case involving family secrets, organized crime, coercion, and the complicated nature of loyalty. Justice, Sarah reflected, was rarely simple, but today it had been served, even if imperfectly. 2 weeks after Devon's confession, the courtroom of judge was filled once again. But this time, the atmosphere was different. The tension that had hung over the mistrial proceedings had been replaced with a sense of purpose and closure. Emma sat in the front row of the gallery, her mother on one side, her father on the other, her little brother between them. She was dressed in a pale blue dress that her mother had helped her pick out, and her hair was pulled back in a neat braid. She looked more mature than she had at the beginning of the trial, as if the past few weeks had aged her, or perhaps matured her in some indefinable way. Judge entered from her chambers, her black robes flowing behind her. The courtroom rose respectfully as she took her seat. The gallery was packed. Reporters, court observers, Emma's extended family, police officers, FBI agents and prosecutors who had worked on the expanded case against and his criminal organization. "This court is now in session," the bailiff announced. Hayes stood and approached the bench. "Your Honor, we are here to formally dismiss all charges against. New evidence has come to light that conclusively proves Mr.'s innocence and identifies the actual perpetrator of the crime in question." Richard Thornton's attorney also stood. "The defense welcomes the dismissal of charges, Your Honor. My client has been vindicated." Judge nodded gravely. She looked out at the courtroom, her gaze settling briefly on Emma. "This case represents many things," she began, her voice carrying through the courtroom with the weight of authority and wisdom. It represents the power of the justice system when it works correctly. It represents the courage of a child who was willing to testify, even when her memory seemed uncertain. And it represents the consequences of crime and deception. She turned to address directly. "Mister, you have been exonerated of all charges in this matter. You are free to go, and this record will be expunged from your background. I want you to know that in my 23 years as a judge, I have rarely seen someone demonstrate the kind of loyalty and sacrifice that you showed in this case, even if that loyalty was misplaced. I hope you will reflect on these events and move forward with your life." Sitting at the defense table closed his eyes. His attorney placed a hand on his shoulder. When opened his eyes again, they were wet with tears. He looked directly at Emma and nodded, a gesture of gratitude, of acknowledgement, of shared understanding. "Furthermore," Judge continued, "I want to commend the police department and the FBI for their exceptional work in this investigation. Detective Sarah and Agent Michael Torres demonstrated remarkable detective work in uncovering not just one crime, but an entire criminal enterprise. The investigation into and his associates will continue in federal court." She then addressed Devon's case. Devon has entered a guilty plea to 5 counts of residential burglary, conspiracy, and money laundering. Sentencing has been scheduled for next month. The court will take into consideration his cooperation with authorities in exchange for the reduced sentence as agreed upon in the plea arrangement. Finally, Judge's gaze settled on Emma once more. "Before we conclude these proceedings, I want to acknowledge the person whose testimony, given with remarkable courage and clarity, made all of this possible. Emma Mitchell, would you please stand?" Emma's heart began to race. She looked at her mother, who gave her an encouraging nod. Slowly, Emma stood up in the gallery. Judge smiled, a warm, genuine smile that transformed her stern judicial face into something almost grandmotherly. "Young lady, you displayed extraordinary bravery in testifying before this court. You helped identify the actual perpetrator of a crime when your initial testimony seemed uncertain. You demonstrated the kind of integrity and courage that I wish more adults possessed. Because of you, an innocent man has been exonerated, a guilty man has been brought to justice, and a criminal organization has been exposed. I want you to know that your actions will have ripple effects for years to come, helping to make our community safer." Emma felt tears streaming down her face. Her parents reached over and held her hands. "Furthermore," Judge continued, "I am recommending that Emma Mitchell receive a commendation from the police department and the prosecutor's office for her contribution to this investigation. You should be very proud of yourself, young lady." The courtroom erupted in applause. Officers stood and clapped. Hayes turned in her seat to smile at Emma. Even some of the reporters were applauding, moved by the sight of a 9-year-old child being recognized for her bravery and honesty. As the courtroom gradually quieted, stood up. His attorney tried to stop him, but gently shook his head. He walked over to the gallery railing and looked directly at Emma. "Thank you," he said simply. "Thank you for telling the truth. Thank you for helping me." Emma couldn't speak. She simply nodded, tears still streaming down her face. Outside the courtroom, after the proceedings had concluded, there was a brief press conference. Emma's parents had agreed to let her speak, though they stood on either side of her for support. Reporters crowded around with cameras and microphones. "How do you feel about the verdict?" one reporter asked. Emma took a deep breath. "I'm happy that the real person who broke into our home is going to go to prison," she said, her voice small but steady. "But I'm also sad because he's brother, and I know loves him. I'm also scared about what happens now, but my parents say I should be proud of myself for telling the truth." "What would you say to other children who might witness crimes?" another reporter asked. Emma thought about this question seriously. "I would say that telling the truth is scary, but it's important. Even if you're not sure about everything you remember, you should tell the grown-ups what you know. The truth is important. Detective Sarah stood nearby, watching Emma speak to the reporters. She felt a surge of respect for the child. Emma had been through something traumatic, had been let down by her own memory, had doubted herself, and yet she had persevered. She had spoken up when it mattered most. Later that evening, Emma's family held a small celebration dinner at their favorite restaurant. Emma's grandparents, aunts, uncles, and cousins all came to celebrate with her. There was a cake with "Justice" written on it in frosting, which made Emma laugh nervously at first, then genuinely. "I'm not sure I'm a justice person," she said to her mother. "I'm just a girl who remembered something." "No," her mother said, taking her hand. "You're a girl who had the courage to speak the truth when it mattered most. That's what justice is. That's who you are now." That night, lying in her bed, Emma looked at the letter had written to her, now framed and hanging on her wall. He had written it after his release, thanking her for her bravery, telling her that he had no anger toward her, that he understood she had done what she needed to do. He had also written about his own journey ahead, returning to his job, rebuilding his life, processing what had happened with his brother. Emma realized that this case had taught her something profound. Justice wasn't simple. It wasn't about clear villains and clear heroes. It was about people making difficult choices, about truth emerging in unexpected ways, about courage manifesting in small moments of honesty. She had pointed at a dog in a courtroom, and everything had changed. Not just for her, but for everyone involved. 3 months had passed since the verdict. Emma stood in the gymnasium of Lincoln Elementary School, surrounded by 800 of her peers. Teachers and administrators lined the walls, and cameras flashed as reporters documented what was about to happen. The school had arranged a special assembly to celebrate Emma's courage and to educate students about the importance of speaking up, about the power of truth, and about how ordinary people, even children, could make extraordinary differences in their communities. Principal Watson stood at the microphone, addressing the students. "Today we have a very special guest. Many of you know Emma Mitchell from our own school. What you might not know is that Emma helped solve a major crime and bring a criminal to justice. But more importantly, Emma demonstrated the kind of integrity and courage that we hope all of you will develop as you grow up. Please welcome Detective Sarah and Officer James with their Police K-9 unit, Duke." The gymnasium erupted in cheers and applause. Emma's heart raced with anticipation. She had been looking forward to this moment for weeks. The gymnasium doors opened. An officer walked through them, Duke at his side. The German Shepherd moved with that same graceful confidence Emma remembered from the courtroom 3 months ago. But this time, instead of triggering fear or trauma, the sight of Duke filled Emma with joy and a sense of completion. "Emma," officer called out, gesturing to her to come forward. Emma walked onto the small stage, her legs trembling slightly. She could feel the eyes of the entire school on her. "This is Duke," explained to the assembly, "one of our most valuable police officers. Duke helped bring a criminal to justice not by arresting him, but by being exactly who he is." Emma recognized Duke's unique markings, that white patch on his left ear, and remembered seeing a dog just like him on the night her home was broken into. That memory, recovered in a moment when Emma was brave enough to speak up, led to the identification and arrest of the actual burglar. Led Duke toward Emma. "Duke is here today to say thank you to the girl who helped him solve a case. Emma, would you like to meet Duke?" Emma's nervousness melted away as Duke approached her. She knelt down, and Duke immediately moved to her, his tail wagging. She buried her face in his fur, and for a moment she was a frightened 9-year-old who had just remembered the truth. But then she looked up, smiling through tears of joy and relief, and the gymnasium erupted in another round of applause and cheers. Over the following weeks, Emma's story became something of a legend at Lincoln Elementary. But more than that, it became a teaching tool. Teachers incorporated the case into their curriculum, not the graphic details, but the themes of courage, memory, trauma, and truth-telling. The school district invited Detective Sarah to speak to students about recognizing crimes and reporting them safely. Dr. Collins, Emma's therapist, gave a presentation on trauma and memory to the staff. Emma's family's life began to return to normal, though normal was different now. The locks had been upgraded. An alarm system had been installed. Emma's parents had invested in therapy for both Emma and her younger brother. But more importantly, they had all learned to live with what had happened, to process it, to move forward. One evening, Emma's father found her sitting in the backyard, looking up at the stars. "Thinking about what happened?" he asked, sitting beside her on the grass. "A little," Emma admitted, "but not in a bad way. I was thinking about how something scary turned into something good, how remembering the dog changed everything." "You were very brave," her father said. "I want you to know that. I'm proud of you." Emma leaned against her father's shoulder. "Do you think he's doing okay?" she asked. "I think so," her father replied. "He sent you a letter recently, didn't he?" Emma nodded. Had indeed sent her a letter. He had written about returning to work, about reconnecting with friends, about the complicated process of rebuilding his life. He had also written about his relationship with his brother, how they were attempting to repair things, though it would take time. He had forgiven Devon, he wrote, though trust would take years to rebuild. "He said he's going back to college," Emma said. "He wants to study criminal justice. He wants to help people." "That sounds like a good way to move forward," her father said. Meanwhile, in a different part of the city, sat in a community college classroom, listening to a lecture on forensic psychology. His life had been derailed, his future uncertain for months, but now he was reclaiming it. He had enrolled in several classes toward a criminal justice degree. He had been thinking about becoming a victim advocate, someone who helped crime victims navigate the legal system, someone who understood their fears and their needs firsthand. He thought often about Emma, the 9-year-old girl who had been terrified on the witness stand, whose memory had seemed unreliable, whose courage had ultimately saved him. He wondered how she was doing, whether she still had nightmares, whether she was healing. One day he received an email from Emma's mother. Emma wanted to write to him to tell him about how she was doing, to ask how he was recovering. They began a correspondence, not frequent but meaningful. Emma would write about school, about working with her therapist, about her nightmares becoming less frequent, would write about his classes, his job search, his hopes for the future. After 6 months, had a job interview at a nonprofit that worked with crime victims. During the interview, he told his story, the arrest, the mistrial, the exoneration, the discovery that his brother had committed the crime. He told them about Emma, about how a child's memory had changed his life. He told them about his commitment to helping other victims navigate the same system that had nearly failed him. He got the job. At her school, Emma had become something of a celebrity, but she was growing tired of it. She wanted to be a normal kid again, or as normal as possible. She wanted people to know her not just as the girl who solved the crime, but as a complex person with interests and dreams that extended beyond that one moment in the courtroom. So when her therapist, Dr. Collins, suggested that Emma might want to participate in a victim advocacy program, volunteering to talk to other children who had experienced trauma, Emma was hesitant at first. But gradually she began to warm to the idea. Perhaps, she thought, by sharing her story, she could help other kids understand that they weren't alone, that their trauma wasn't permanent, that they had the strength to move forward. When Emma turned 10, 6 months after the courtroom recognition, her school held a small birthday celebration. Her friends sang to her, teachers gave her cards, and a special package arrived in the mail. It was from. Inside was a framed photograph. It showed Emma and Duke together at the school assembly, both of them smiling. But what made Emma cry was the inscription written on the back of the frame by himself. To Emma, thank you for remembering. Thank you for being brave. Thank you for giving me my life back. You are an extraordinary person and I will never forget what you did. I hope we can stay in touch for the rest of our lives. with gratitude and admiration. Emma showed the photo to her therapist during their next session. "How does that make you feel?" Dr. Collins asked. "Like what happened to me wasn't just something bad," Emma said thoughtfully. "Like it became something that helped someone. I still don't like what happened. I still have bad days, but I feel like I turned something terrible into something meaningful." "That's a very mature perspective," Dr. Collins said. Emma nodded. "I'm not the same person I was before the break-in, but I'm not broken either. I'm just different, and some of that difference is actually okay." Years later, when Emma was in high school, she would write an essay for her English class about the incident. She would describe the terror of that night, the trauma of the trial, the moment in the courtroom when everything changed. But more importantly, she would write about resilience, about the human capacity to remember and to heal, about the power of speaking truth even when terrified. That essay would win an award. It would be published in a local magazine, and it would inspire other young people to speak up about their own experiences, to seek help, to understand that trauma was not shameful and that recovery was possible. But all of that was in the future. In the present, Emma Mitchell was simply a girl who had pointed at a dog in a courtroom and changed her life, and the lives of everyone around her. She was a girl who had discovered that courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was acting despite the fear. She was a girl who had learned that one moment of honesty could ripple outward and create waves of justice and healing that touched far more people than she ever could have imagined. And as she looked at its photograph, at Duke's smiling face and her own tear-stained cheeks frozen in a moment of pure connection, Emma understood something profound. This case would never really be over. It would be part of her story forever. But it no longer defined her. It had shaped her, yes, but it hadn't broken her. And that, she realized, was the greatest victory of all.